They thought he was just another neighbor with a noisy grill. They mocked him, shamed him, even dragged him into a community hearing to humiliate him in front of everyone. But 5 minutes later, the same crowd that laughed would be standing in stunned silence, because this man was no ordinary backyard cook. This was the day the smoke told the truth. The hum of conversation hushed the moment the folding chairs scraped against the polished floor. It wasn't a courtroom, but it carried the same chill of judgment. The community center had been transformed into a stage of authority. Rows of neighbors seated in silence, their eyes flicking toward the front table where the HOA board sat in perfect posture, papers neatly stacked as if justice could be measured in ink and signatures. At the center of it all sat Marcus Davis. His chair felt smaller than the rest, as though designed to remind him of his place. He didn't wear a suit, didn't come armed with thick binders or polished words. Just a clean shirt, calloused hands folded in his lap, and a quiet calm that stood in stark contrast to the theater of power surrounding him. Across the table, Linda Carson adjusted her glasses, her lips pursed in the sharp line of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. She leaned toward the microphone with the confidence of a woman who thought she was protecting more than just property values. She thought she was a guardian of dignity itself. "We're here," she began, her voice slicing through the still air, "to address an ongoing violation that undermines the harmony of this community." The words landed heavier than they should have. Ongoing violation. Harmony of the community. Each syllable was weighted with disdain, and though no one said it aloud, the meaning was clear. Marcus was a problem. She lifted a photo from the folder and held it high for all to see. A snapshot of his backyard, smoke curling into the sky, friends laughing with plates in their hands. A moment of joy turned into evidence of crime. "This," Linda announced, "is what we are dealing with." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some neighbors tilted their heads, sympathetic, remembering the smell of smoked brisket that had drifted across the cul-de-sac. Others shook their heads, more eager to align themselves with the woman in charge. To them, Marcus wasn't a neighbor enjoying his yard. He was a disruption, a reminder that joy could be messy, uncontainable, and unapproved. Marcus didn't speak. Not yet. He sat steady, his eyes downcast, letting the weight of their judgment wash over him like heat from the smoker he tended every weekend. He'd grown used to this posture, the quiet endurance of a man who had worked too many jobs where his value was questioned, his efforts scrutinized, his pride tested. Linda smiled faintly, savoring the silence, mistaking it for defeat. "We have rules for a reason," she declared. "And when one person chooses to ignore those rules, it disrespects everyone who follows them. This isn't just about smoke or noise. It's about respect." The word hung in the air, bitterly ironic. Respect. Marcus had lived his life giving it freely, to his elders, to his co-workers, to his neighbors, even when it was never returned. A neighbor in the back whispered, "It's just a barbecue," but Linda ignored it, pressing forward with her speech. She wanted Marcus small, cornered, humiliated before the crowd. And in that moment, he was, but what she didn't know, what no one in that sterile, judgment-filled room yet understood, was that Marcus carried something she could never control, something stronger than bylaws and louder than any gavel, a truth waiting to ignite. And when it did, the smoke that Linda used as evidence would become the very signal of her undoing. The board shuffled papers, preparing to vote. The outcome looked inevitable. The man with callous hands and a quiet gaze sat alone, underestimated and dismissed. The underdog had been caged, but cages, like smoke, have a way of slipping through cracks. Marcus had always been the kind of man people overlooked. In the fluorescent glow of office break rooms, at PDA meetings, even in the checkout line of the local grocery store, he blended in unassuming, almost invisible. That invisibility came at a cost. But Marcus had learned long ago that it was better to be underestimated than to be noticed for the wrong reasons. He'd grown up on the south side of Birmingham, in a one-bedroom apartment that rattled every time the freight trains rolled by. His mother worked double shifts at the hospital, coming home too tired to eat, but never too tired to press a kiss against her son's forehead. His father wasn't there. Responsibility had arrived early for Marcus, cooking meals from whatever scraps were left, working odd jobs before he could even drive, and shielding his little sister from the hard edges of poverty. Food became his language of love. Where words failed, flavor spoke. He could stretch a pound of meat to feed 6 mouths, make cornbread from almost nothing, and bring comfort through the slow, steady patience of a pot simmering on the stove. What nobody at the HOA meeting knew, what none of those polished, rule-wielding neighbors even imagined, was that Marcus had once dreamed of becoming a chef. Life, however, had other plans. When his sister got sick, he abandoned culinary school to pay hospital bills. When his mother's back gave out, he picked up extra shifts at the warehouse. His dreams went into the same box as the college brochures he once pinned to the wall, a box tucked in the closet, gathering dust, forgotten by everyone but him. So when Marcus smoked meat in his backyard, it wasn't just a hobby. It was the last living fragment of a dream that had been sacrificed again and again for the people he loved. Each rib, each slice of brisket, each homemade sauce, it all carried history's struggle and a quiet defiance. But the HOA didn't see that. They didn't see the man who had clawed his way through years of invisible battles. They saw smoke, noise, and a violation. And Linda Carson, perched at the head of that table, made sure his story remained buried under layers of paperwork and bylaws. She leaned forward, savoring her authority. "Mr. Davis," she said with a clipped tone, "this is not the first time your behavior has come under review. Last summer it was the music. In the fall, it was the number of cars parked near your property. Now it's smoke." She paused, letting the weight of her words echo. This pattern shows a blatant disregard for community standards. Neighbors shifted in their seats. Some nodded, falling in line with her version of events. Others frowned, sensing the imbalance. Marcus sat motionless, absorbing each word. He didn't defend himself. Not yet. To defend himself would mean revealing the years of sacrifice, the dreams deferred, the nights he fell asleep bone-tired, but still woke up before dawn to smoke meat because it made him feel alive again. That wasn't the kind of story this room wanted to hear. But beneath the humiliation, beneath the quiet endurance, there was something coiled deep inside Marcus. Something unshaken. Something no HOA could regulate. They thought they were silencing a hobbyist with too much time on his hands. What they didn't know was that Marcus was no ordinary man grilling in his backyard. He was a craftsman forged in fire, with skills, patience, and a hidden strength waiting for the right moment to surface. And when that moment came, it wouldn't just expose their arrogance. It would change the neighborhood forever. The meeting should have ended with the board's decision, a quiet note in the records, and Marcus dismissed with a warning. But arrogance is rarely satisfied with silence. Linda Carson had tasted the power of the room leaning her way, and she wasn't ready to let it go. She leaned closer to the microphone, her smile tight and deliberate. "Mr. Davis, perhaps you think the rules don't apply to you. Perhaps you believe that your backyard cookouts are more important than the standards the rest of us uphold." She let the words hang, scanning the crowd. "But tell me, what exactly are you cooking that requires smoke so thick it clouds the entire street?" Laughter broke out in the back row. A few neighbors chuckled, emboldened by her tone. One man muttered, loud enough to be heard, "Probably just hot dogs and lighter fluid." Another whispered, phone raised halfway, recording the scene like it was entertainment. Marcus didn't flinch. His expression remained steady, almost serene. The laughter rolled over him like waves against stone. Linda's eyes gleamed. She had found the weak spot she thought she was looking for, an opening to press harder. "I'll tell you what," she continued, her voice sharp with false generosity. "Why don't you prove us wrong? Why don't you show this community that your so-called barbecue is anything more than smoke and noise? I'm sure everyone here would love to see if it's as impressive as you claim." The crowd stirred, whispers darting between rows. A challenge had been laid bare, but it wasn't really about food. It was about stripping a man of dignity in front of his neighbors. Someone laughed again. "Yeah, let's have a taste test." Another voice called, half joking but loud enough to turn heads. Phones lifted higher, recording smirks, raised eyebrows, and the slow build of spectacle. Marcus still didn't move. His hands remained folded, his gaze steady, his silence louder than any defense he could have offered. The room, sensing his calm refusal to rise, filled the gap with its own noise. Murmurs, chuckles, shifting seats. Linda pressed forward, savoring the spotlight. Or maybe, she said with a sneer, maybe the truth is you don't want us to know. Maybe the truth is there's nothing special at all. The sting of her words spread through the room, followed by a low rumble of agreement. The balance had shifted further against him. He wasn't just a man accused of violating rules anymore. He was being mocked, baited, pushed into a corner. Yet Marcus sat still. No defense. No argument. No denial. Just silence. Steady and unbroken, as if he were listening to a song only he could hear. And in that silence, something subtle shifted. The laughter grew louder, but so did the curiosity. Why didn't he break? Why didn't he argue back like anyone else would? What did he know? What did he hold inside that let him endure humiliation without crumbling? The tension thickened, wrapping the room like smoke itself. The crowd thought they were watching a man unravel. They didn't realize they were watching a storm gather, waiting for the first crack of thunder. And when it struck, it would silence every whisper in that room. The room simmered with smugness. Laughter still rippled from the back row. Cameras pointed like weapons. Neighbors leaning forward to watch Marcus fold under the pressure. Linda sat tall, chin lifted, certain she had cornered him into submission. Then, slowly, Marcus lifted his eyes. For the first time that evening, his gaze met Linda's across the table. Calm, steady, and behind it, something that unsettled her just enough to falter mid-smile. He rose from his chair without a word. No dramatic speech, no protest. Just a man standing, taller than most had noticed before, shoulders squared, presence suddenly undeniable. He reached into his worn leather bag, pulled out a folder, and slid across the table toward the board. The head of the board, confused, opened it. A silence fell as glossy photographs spilled out. Photos not of violations, but of gleaming trophies, medals, and certificates. Newspaper clippings with headlines. Local pitmaster wins regional title. National Barbecue Invitational names new champion. From warehouse worker to award-winning chef. Linda froze. The crowd leaned forward, squinting at the images. There he was, Marcus, the same quiet man they had dismissed, standing on competition stages, holding plaques, shaking hands with chefs whose names they recognized from television. His ribs had been crowned best in the state. His brisket had beaten out professionals with million-dollar kitchens. He wasn't just some neighbor with a smoker. He was a decorated pitmaster whose skills had earned national recognition. Gasps broke through the silence. Phones lowered. The whispers shifted tone, from ridicule to disbelief. Wait, that's him. I've seen that article. No way. Marcus said nothing. He let the photos speak. Let the truth rise through the room like smoke escaping a closed lid. And then came the moment that shattered the last of Linda's control. The head of the board cleared his throat, still staring at a certificate signed by the mayor's office itself, commending Marcus for hosting charity cookouts that had raised thousands of dollars for children's hospitals. This isn't a violation, he murmured, half to himself. This is recognition. The silence deepened, heavier now, thick with awe and regret. For a heartbeat, no one moved. And then, as though on cue, the weight of the revelation tipped the room into chaos. Neighbors who had laughed were now whispering frantically, some scrolling their phones, pulling up articles and photos to confirm what lay before them. Linda sat frozen, color draining from her face. Her smirk had vanished, replaced with the stiff mask of someone watching the ground shift beneath her feet. She had built her entire attack on the assumption that Marcus was ordinary, small, forgettable. But ordinary men did not have championships and headlines attached to their names. Ordinary men did not turn smoke into gold. And now, the entire neighborhood knew. Marcus lowered himself back into his chair, calm as ever, hands folded in front of him. He didn't need to gloat. He didn't need to rub it in. The silence, the stunned faces, the chaos of realization, that was enough. The power dynamic had flipped in a single, devastating instant, and everyone could feel it. The air in the community center no longer crackled with laughter. It hung heavy, like smoke after fire. The photos on the table had transformed the atmosphere, stripping the smugness from the room. Neighbors who had been eager to mock Marcus now shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, eyes darting anywhere but toward him. The murmurs began soft, hesitant. "I had no idea," whispered one woman, clutching her phone as if the headlines on the screen might vanish if she blinked. Another voice, more distant. "He's been winning competitions? All this time." Phones that once recorded the ridicule now trembled in hands that scrolled frantically through search results. Picture after picture confirmed the truth. Marcus wasn't just good at barbecue. He was great. He had stood shoulder to shoulder with some of the best in the country, his name etched into articles, his recipes celebrated. Linda Carson sat frozen in her seat, her face pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. The woman who had thrived on control, on wielding rules like weapons, now found herself exposed. Every word she had spoken dripped with arrogance. Every jab at Marcus now echoed back at her as humiliation. She opened her mouth once, as if to speak, but nothing came out. The authority she had built on fear had slipped away in an instant. Then came the applause. It started small, a single pair of hands clapping near the back of the room. Others joined hesitantly, until the sound grew louder, filling the hall with a rhythm that carried both respect and shame. Respect for the man who had endured silently, shame for the way so many had laughed at him. Marcus didn't rise. He didn't bow. He simply sat, still calm, letting the storm of reaction swirl around him. Dignity radiated from his silence. He had no need to gloat. Truth had spoken louder than arrogance ever could. The board shifted uncomfortably. The head member cleared his throat again, this time with a tone that carried weight. "It appears," he said slowly, his voice cracking slightly, "that Mr. Davis has contributed to this community in ways we did not fully appreciate. His skills, his recognition, well, I believe we may owe him an apology." Whispers spread quickly. An apology? From the HOA? The very idea seemed unthinkable. Yet here they were, watching the scales of justice tilt in real time. Linda lowered her gaze, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. Her voice, once sharp and commanding, was nowhere to be found. The humiliation wasn't just personal. It was public, undeniable, and irreversible. And still, Marcus showed no arrogance, no satisfaction. His quiet composure only magnified the depth of his victory. In a room full of neighbors who had dismissed him, he had revealed his truth with grace, not vengeance. The applause swelled again, stronger this time, echoing against the walls. For the first time, Marcus wasn't invisible. He wasn't underestimated. He wasn't the man people overlooked in grocery stores and meetings. He was a neighbor who carried strength and talent that deserved recognition. And as the clapping continued, one truth became clear to everyone present. The balance of power in this neighborhood had shifted, and it wasn't shifting back. Justice had only just begun to unfold. The applause faded into an awed hush, but its echo lingered like a heartbeat in the walls of the community center. For years, Marcus had been a quiet neighbor, the man whose presence was noted only in passing. Now, the silence around him was different. It wasn't dismissal. It was reverence. The neighbors who once whispered complaints now leaned forward. Their expressions softened with something Marcus hadn't seen before: respect. Eyes that had rolled when smoke drifted across the cul-de-sac now carried a different weight, as though seeing him for the first time. He was no longer just a man with the smoker. He was a craftsman, a champion, a figure who had earned recognition far beyond their tidy lawns and painted fences. Linda Carson sat stiff as a statue, her authority drained away. She had built her reputation on keeping others small, but tonight she had been reduced under her own spotlight. The smirk that once curled her lips was gone, replaced with the silence of defeat. Even her allies on the board avoided her gaze, unwilling to be pulled into the gravity of her humiliation. The head of the board cleared his throat again, fumbling with the papers before him. His voice carried less authority now and more humility. "Mr. Davis," he said carefully, "on behalf of the board, we extend our apology. It seems we failed to recognize the contributions you bring to this community. Not only are you in full compliance with the rules, but your achievements are something we should be proud of." The words fell heavy in the room, not because of their eloquence, but because of their rarity. An HOA board apologizing? It was almost unthinkable. Yet here it was, delivered not from goodwill, but from necessity. The power dynamic had shifted so decisively that even the rule enforcers had no choice but to acknowledge it. Marcus gave a small nod, his expression unchanged. He didn't need grand gestures. He didn't need to savor Linda's downfall. His silence spoke louder than any boast could. Then, slowly, neighbors began to approach. One by one. Hesitant at first, they crossed the aisle of chairs to shake his hand. A man who had once complained about the smell of smoke muttered awkwardly, "Your ribs? I'd be honored to try them sometime." A woman who had joined in laughter earlier said softly, "I didn't know. You got a real gift." The tide had turned completely. Respect rolled in like a tide, sweeping away the jeers, the whispers, the mockery. Where Linda's voice had once dominated the room, now Marcus's presence filled it. He hadn't raised his tone, hadn't fought back with anger or pride, and yet he had claimed a victory more powerful than any confrontation could have earned him. Linda, meanwhile, shrank smaller with every handshake Marcus received. Her authority wasn't challenged with words. It was dismantled by the sight of a community shifting its loyalty away from her and toward the man she had tried to belittle. By the time the board dismissed the meeting, the transformation was complete. Marcus walked out not as an accused rule breaker, but as a man recognized, respected, and, finally, seen. And Linda Carson, once the unshakable voice of the neighborhood, walked out in silence, carrying the weight of a reputation she could never repair. The night ended not with gavel strikes or arguments, but with something far more powerful: silence filled with respect. As Marcus stepped out of the community center, the cool evening air carried the faintest trace of hickory smoke from a nearby backyard. It wasn't intrusive anymore. To the neighbors who followed behind, it was no longer a nuisance. It was a reminder of patience, of skill, of a man who had carried his story in quiet dignity until the day it was finally seen. In every neighborhood, in every workplace, in every crowded room, there are people like Marcus, people overlooked, underestimated, dismissed as ordinary. The world often mistakes humility for weakness, silence for insignificance. But silence, when carried with strength, is not emptiness. It is power contained. Marcus never shouted, never demanded recognition, never retaliated with anger. He didn't need to, because true strength is not measured by how loudly you speak, but by how firmly you stand when others try to knock you down. Linda Carson thought rules were power. She believed authority came from appearances, from control, from the fear she could instill in others. But fear fades. Control crumbles. Arrogance always writes its own downfall. And in the end, the woman who once commanded a room with her voice left it with nothing. No applause, no allies, no respect. Marcus, on the other hand, walked out with none of those things on his agenda. Yet he carried them all with him. He didn't just defend his right to barbecue in his backyard. He reminded everyone watching that respect is not about titles or positions. It is earned quietly through sacrifice, persistence, and authenticity. His story was not just about food. It was about the long nights he had given up for family, the dreams he had placed on hold, the battles fought in silence. Every rib he smoked, every brisket he seasoned, carried the weight of that history. And when the moment of truth arrived, it was those sacrifices, not as trophies, that gave his presence undeniable power. The lesson was clear: never underestimate anyone. The person you dismiss may carry victories you've never seen. The man you laugh at might hold the strength to humble a room without raising his voice. The neighbor you overlook could be the very one whose quiet perseverance outshines your loudest achievements. Respect is not demanded. It is lived. And the greatest power is often invisible, biding its time, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. That night, Marcus returned home to his backyard. The same smoker, the same grill, the same tools he had always used. Nothing about him had changed, yet everything had, because the neighborhood no longer saw smoke as a violation. They saw it for what it truly was, the signal of a man whose resilience could not be contained. And as the first sparks of the next fire glowed against the night sky, the truth remained, etched like smoke against the stars. Honor is not given. It is earned. And the quietest among us often carry the loudest legacies.